Well, hello and good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's edition of Scottish Learning Festival Conversations. My name is Ollie Bray, and I'm one of the strategic directors here at Education Scotland. This year, as many of you know, we've taken a slightly different approach to the SLF, where the idea is that we've got a number of high-level stimulus inputs from renowned international educators. And I'm absolutely delighted that this evening I get to introduce Professor Pak Tee Ng from Singapore. And Pak Tee, I'm sure, will introduce himself, a little bit in a minute. But I would like to kind of say and to let people know that Pak Tee is what we say a Kent face of Scottish education. He's been involved in and out of Scottish education now for a number of years. He's part of our International Council of Education Advisors and has been involved. And also, this is not Pak Tee's first visit to the Scottish Learning Festival, albeit his first online visit, because Pak Tee did an excellent presentation at the SECC back in 2019. His day job, as well as being in huge demand from ministries of education and education systems around the world, is that he's associate professor at the Singapore's National Institute of Education. But one of the great things about Pak Tee is he brings a very, very realistic appreciation for what's going on in the classroom, because he started his career as a teacher of mathematics, followed by work at the Ministry of Education before joining higher education at the National Institute as an academic. And I think one of the great insights that Pak Tee always brings to his work is his knowledge and experience at all different levels of the system, from teacher to local authority, employee, to now academic as well. He's produced a whole range of different publications, and I'm sure that he'll reflect on some of these during his presentations, always using evidence in all of his advice around education change, policy and leadership. And his strong message is always to encourage educators to be courageous in the face of change. So without further ado, I want to give you a warm virtual welcome to Scotland, Pak Tee. I know that you're going to be speaking for about 45 minutes, and then we'll also open it up for questions. And I will just encourage the people that are on the call to leave the questions in the chat, and we'll pull together some themes and we'll ask you those questions again. So without further ado, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Ollie. Hello, everyone. So I'm Pak Tee Ng from Singapore. I'm a teacher at this moment. And actually, for the past 20-something years, I'm at the National Institute of Education. And my main role is to help to train teachers and school leaders for my country. And it is a privilege to be able to be here. Thank you very much for inviting me here. So today, what I'm going to talk about is about education reform in the time of global change. But my focus is not so much about policies, but rather about us as an education profession. And I speak from the point of view of myself as a teacher, and a proud one. So perhaps just kind of following the slides a little, is to help you to be able to focus on some of these messages. So my introductory remark to what I'm going to say this today is this. Of course, this is a time of great uncertainty, both globally and locally. Now, the global situation, of course, fragmenting. There's war going, tensions between big countries, and domestic economies for many countries are rather gloomy at this moment. Of course, unhelpfully, the pandemic, and then, of course, the challenge to supply chains and so on and so forth. With all these as backdrop, therefore, in many, many jurisdictions and countries, of course, there's a lot of difficulties in terms of that sort of fiscal constraints, budgetary constraints. So domestic economic situation is quite gloomy. People have been losing their jobs. And technological change is rapid. It may sound like good news that we have high levels of technology. So on one hand, that is absolutely true. But on the other hand, people are actually also losing their jobs because of technology advancement. Therefore, the idea of lifelong learning And so perhaps for some, they actually feel that it is just too rapid, so quick, so fast that they are not able to keep up. That is the sort of world that our children is growing into. So usually when we think about education reform, we think about actions of policymakers. That's what you usually will think of. However, I like to change that point of view, or at least today. I like to think of this sort of kind of reform, but from a ground up, from us as educators, that sort of point of view. By which I mean this. Policies are actually important. Policies are very important. Why? Because good policies, they bring a lot of benefits, and policies signal the direction of change. So on one hand, policies are important. However, most children, they don't know or they don't care about policies. So whether today you do A or you do B, or the minister announced A or announced B, the children may not know or care. But what they truly experience, they experience their school, they experience their teachers. Therefore, what I'm really saying is this. Policies are important, but it is us as educators that really add flesh to the policy. That is to say, policies can become empty unless the educators live it out, implement it, and for the good of the children. Therefore, my point is this. To many children, whether they like school or a subject, whether they enjoy learning or otherwise, teachers make all the difference. So children do not experience policies, they experience their teachers. Merely as an example, if you ask a child, what subject do you like? And the child say, I like English. Why do you like English? Oh, because of Mr. So-and-so or Mrs. So-and-so. It's nothing to do with English. It's everything to do with Mr. So-and-so or Madam So-and-so and Mr. So-and-so. And you ask another child, what subject do you like? I like mathematics. And why do you like mathematics? Oh, because of Mr. So-and-so or Madam So-and-so or Mrs. So-and-so. It's everything to do with the teacher. Of course, I can understand that some children, more naturally more inclined towards mathematics. But seriously, for the average child, if they like a subject, it is because they have met a teacher that has made that subject come alive. If a child were to say, when you ask, what subject do you like? And the child's response is, I like mathematics. And you ask, why do you like mathematics? And the child's response is, oh, fractions make me feel so warm and fuzzy. I feel so good about fractions. Maybe that child may need some help. So I think most of the time, actually, it is the school and the teachers that makes all the difference to the child. Therefore, you play an important role, not only in your school, but in the entire system. And our impact as educators is not just about my individual impact and influence, but us as a collective, the education profession. Together, we impact the whole society. Together, we influence the next generation. Therefore, I'd like to say that the SLF itself signifies the importance of the education profession in Scotland. And that's why there's a whole learning festival for educators. That signifies our importance to the society. So now that I've said that both sides are important, policymakers and us professionals on the ground. So could I ask you to humor me and do something? I know I'm online, okay? So we may not be able to see each other so easily, but kind of just humor me, would you? I'm just trying to make a point down here. Okay, so if you could you use your right hand, okay, right hand, and then kind of draw a big circle above your head. Okay, draw a big circle like what I'm doing now, draw a big circle above your head. Now, if you draw a big circle above your head, and if you look at it, you should see that it is turning clockwise, okay? That means in the kind of right-hand natural direction. If you turn it over your head, you should see that it is turning in a clockwise direction. Now, do not change direction, do not change direction, wind downwards, wind downwards, wind downwards, wind downwards, until it is somewhere at your stomach area. When you now look at it, now kind of from above, you should see that it is now anti-clockwise. Now, if you still don't get it, let's do it one more time, all right? Shall we? So now draw a big circle above your head, draw a big circle above your head, and then look at it from below. It ought to be clockwise. Don't change direction. Just wind downwards, wind downwards, wind downwards, wind downwards, wind downwards, and look at it from above. You should see that it has changed direction. It is now anti-clockwise. Okay? And if you still don't get it, just do it a few more times. All right. Now, but you have not changed direction. So why is it that just now when I was looking at it, it looks clockwise to me. And then after that, when it's at my stomach area and I look at it, it becomes the other direction, anti-clockwise. Why? And of course, there's no magic in this. Everybody can say the reason. And the reason simply is just a different perspective. That is to say, the reason why it was clockwise originally is simply because I was looking from below. I was looking from below. It was the same thing, the same circle. But later on, I was looking from above. And when you look at the same thing, the direction was different, even when it was exactly the same thing. So what am I trying to say? Therefore, now you understand why people on top see things differently from people below, even when it's exactly the same thing. It was exactly the same cyclical motion, but it's different when you look from top or when you look from bottom. Now you know why people on top see things differently from people below. And if you are kind of someone who is kind of in the middle, okay, middle level leadership, then if this thing is kind of at your eye level, all right, it's not on top, it's not below, at your eye level, actually, you see a straight line. You see a straight line. And so people in the middle sometimes get very upset because to them, people on top and people below, both of you are all wrong. It's a straight line. What I'm trying to say is therefore this. Who is right? Actually, all these perspectives are all right from their perspective. Therefore, the main thing is this. If we want to work together as a collective, we got to understand one another. That is to say, when one party looking from a certain perspective feels this way, another party, we could be actually talking about the same thing and quite aligned in what we are trying to achieve down here. But I am talking from a different perspective. Therefore, if we really want to impact the system as a collective, the main thing is this. It's called empathy. Let's empathize with one another. Let's understand that this person or this particular party is working, but from another perspective, from me. Therefore, let's understand one another. This is how we can work together. If we do not develop that sort of empathy, the empathy from understanding that actually, this is just my perspective. That's because I'm looking from my angle. Then I will always think that someone else, they are either wrong, or perhaps I'm being victimized down here, or things of that nature. Therefore, clockwise or anti-clockwise, both are equally right and equally valid. We need to learn how to see things from other people's perspectives. Therefore, whether we are teachers, we are leaders of schools, we are local authorities, we are policymakers at headquarters, actually, we may come from different perspectives, but collectively, I think we're all working for the good of the children. So now let me turn my attention to us as an education profession. So times are hard and there are a lot of uncertainties. I'm saying that despite the uncertainties, we will adapt and improve if we as a profession, okay, do 4 things, care about 4 things, namely care about our students, care about our craft, care about our children's future, and care about our profession. For each, there could be many things that we talk about, but I think what I'll do is to say 1 point per care, right? For each care about, I'll just mention 1 point. Let's start with care about our students. The main thing is this. Our students actually spend a lot of time with us. Our children actually spend a lot of time with us. Therefore, their well-being, sometimes we think of well-being as if like just a matter of poverty, all these things must be addressed. Poverty and mental health, all these things are given. But I'm saying that for the average child and student, even if they are not exactly in poverty or they have very immediate mental health issues, they actually spend a lot of time in school. Therefore, the quality of life that they have depends very much on whether they actually enjoy their time in school, in the classroom. So when they're in the class, and if the learning is not interesting, the learning is not inspiring, they're all just thinking about how they could escape the classroom. And of course, that couldn't be done. All the time, all daydreaming and hoping that the lesson will end. Actually, their beings are not really well. Therefore, the main thing is this. There's a lot that we can say about caring for our students, those poverty, those with mental health issues, etc., etc. But there's one other thing that we really just need to focus on: good teaching and learning. Because for the average child, they spend a lot of time in school, in the classrooms. The quality of life, the quality of their being, it depends very much on whether they actually enjoy learning in school. So I'd like us to reflect on this question. How can we expect inspired students without inspired teachers? And how do we expect students to enjoy learning if teachers do not enjoy teaching? And us as teachers, I would say that the enjoyment of teaching must come from within. It is not just a matter of external working conditions. Of course, that is important. Some of these factors are important. But I'm also saying for us, as a teacher, if on a daily basis, I walk around school and just feel like, I just feel like dying, then really the students will be so demotivated in class. Because whether the teacher is dead or alive makes all the difference to a lesson, makes all the difference to a class. Therefore, the main question to ask as educators is this: the motivation that comes from within. How can we expect inspired students unless we ourselves are inspired? And how do we expect students to enjoy learning unless we actually intrinsically enjoy teaching. So that is the first point of reflection. And so, of course, related to that, therefore, our craft, because it's teaching. So the second thing is to care about our craft. And so I take from Singapore, okay? Singapore teachers are very responsible teachers. Oh, I love them, okay? I help my country to train teachers. I love my teachers. They are all very hardworking and responsible people. And our problem is that sometimes we are so hardworking and responsible that we'll teach and we'll teach and we'll teach and we'll teach until the students, they all look as though they are going to die. And we'll still continue to teach them. We just want to teach more and more. And our assumption is by teaching more, our students will learn more. And that is the thing that we are trying to change down here. Caring about craft means this. And we have this tagline, teach less, learn more. Instead of always just thinking, how do we teach more and more? If we teach less, but teach better, then students will learn more and learn better. And that is a change of the mindset. And it changes from this idea of simply, how do I teach? To ask the question from a different perspective. How do I help my students to learn? And that actually is quite a fundamental change. Instead of concentrating on how do I teach and how do I teach more and more, just trying to be a responsible teacher, I turn it around and say, now the big question is, how do I help my students to learn? And these different profiles of students, how do I develop myself so that I have a whole repertoire of strategies, a whole repertoire of tools to help different profiles of students to learn? Therefore, if we care about our craft, we'll develop ourselves. The next thing is, of course, owning our craft. It's like being a chef. And if you are a chef, definitely you will have some dishes that you're famous for. But if you're truly a chef, then you wouldn't just be happy with that one or two dishes that you're famous for. You take pride and you feel satisfied, fulfillment when you create a new dish. And so for us, it is true that we take pride and satisfaction to design a lesson, another lesson in which students, their eyes lighted up. And we know that they have learned what we intend to teach, but this time they enjoyed that whole learning process with us. And if we continue to do this, then actually we are role models of advancing learning and teaching. And this is leadership of a different kind. It is not administrative. It is leadership because of positive influence, that we are positive influence, not only for our students, but to our fellow teachers in the system. This is leadership, and this leads to change on the ground. And it is not because of policy, it's because of role modeling. And this is great leadership. And we need to care about our children's future, by which we can say a lot of things, but perhaps I just mentioned this one. We know that our children are growing in and into a world that's different from ours. One thing that's happened quite recently is artificial intelligence. And so, of course, there's now this big debate, okay, about how we could use artificial intelligence. And of course, the other side is to be careful about things like plagiarism or infringement of intellectual property or privacy, or whether there's ethical use of artificial intelligence. So yes, we need to sort out some of these things, how to use, how to prevent misuse, etc. But I would like to encourage us as education professionals to kind of, instead of just looking at the level of how do we use, to think more fundamentally, because we are the voice of reason in technological change. So technological change is good, but we need to be able to do this in a very reasonable manner so that it really truly benefits the children. So the fundamental question that I would like to ask, and in Singapore, that's what I raised for my fellow teachers, is this. So given that artificial intelligence is here, it's a given, all right? And everybody is talking about how to use it and how to prevent misuse. The question really is a play on words. If artificial intelligence is artificial intelligence, then what exactly is real intelligence? So let me say that again. If artificial intelligence is artificial intelligence, then what exactly is real intelligence? And education should wrap itself around this idea of how do we therefore help to enhance that real human intelligence. Remember, behind artificial intelligence is actually human intelligence that designed that artificial intelligence. Therefore, the question I'm raising for my own system with my fellow educators is this: how can artificial intelligence actually enhance human intelligence? Not just about how we could use it to do our current work or preventing misuse. Those are important issues, but we have to think more deeply. It is a fundamental change, a paradigm shift. So how can artificial intelligence actually enhance human intelligence? How do we use it such that we actually help to develop and allow that human intelligence that our children have to flourish? So education should not let artificial intelligence deprive learners of real human intelligence. Indeed, education should be the platform, should be that voice of reason, that educators, we know how to use artificial intelligence so that real human intelligence could actually flourish. Exactly how it is done, we do not know yet. And that is why educators, we have to rise to the occasion, think together. And lastly, let's care about our profession. And by which I mean this. Dear educators, because times are hard, precisely because times are hard, therefore all the more, let's stand tall as an educator. Teaching is a respectable profession. School leaders and teachers, we are nation builders. We help to build the next generation. Therefore, when the going gets tough, then be an encouragement to one another. That is to say, if you find that circumstances may or may not be the most encouraging, then let me step forward and be an encouragement to one another. If I feel, and precisely I feel, that others may not appreciate educators, then let me, as an educator, start appreciating one another, precisely because we are all walking a path not easily traveled. And therefore, in this book that I wrote about the Singapore education system, in Singapore, I'm one of the main carriers of this message. We always remind ourselves, who are educators? Educators are people who plant trees so that others may sit under the trees. And no one knows who planted those trees in the first place. That's who you are. That's who I am. That's what we do. And not only that, education is actually the human enterprise of paying it forward. That is to say, the previous generation of educators, they had a hard time as well. They went through change. They went through hardship. They paid the price of change so that today we are okay. And so what do we do in this generation? We, in this generation, will pay the price of change so that the next generation will have their chance, their hope for paid forward. That's what you do. That's what I do. And so if you are in a leadership position, then could I remind you, leadership in education is about having the skills of CEO, but always the heart of a loving teacher. That's how we could lead fellow teachers to plant those trees together. So leaders of schools, you are actually teachers who lead other teachers to plant those trees together. And perhaps no one knows except you who planted those trees in the first place. And so education is about long suffering and tenacity. It's never easy. So dig deep into your heart. Be wise, be courageous, be of good cheer. Bite the bullet, and then let's persevere. Just know that whatever our efforts, someone else always benefits from what we do. Therefore, can I also help you? Because this is something that I talk to my own system, in my own system, to the leaders and to the teachers all the time. Because sometimes educators may be encouraged, sometimes we may be discouraged. This is just real life. Times may sometimes be good, may sometimes be really difficult. So sometimes we lament that if only the world is not like that, if only our world is not like that. So one of the things that we talk among ourselves as Singaporean educators, and I being a facilitator of learning for my own school head teachers, middle leaders, teachers, would be this: take care of yourself. That's what we always say. Because when we take care of ourselves, we are actually taking care of the system. Because we are the system. And remember, we may not be able to change the world. We may not be able to change the world. But what we can do, we can change our inner world to embrace the external world so much better. And that means all the world. It means the world to the people around us. When you work with somebody, especially the person is your boss, whether the person is happy or unhappy makes all the difference to your life. If my boss is a happy person, I'm happy. If my boss is on a daily basis a really unhappy person, my life is unhappy. In a way, it's as simple as that. Therefore, our own disposition means the world to the people around us. Therefore, can I encourage us? Don't just get angry, upset, angry, upset, angry, upset with difficult situations that we may be facing. Instead, remember who we are. And especially people in leadership positions. So in Singapore, I usually tell the people who are leaders during programs, I say, just think through in your mind. You don't need to do anything. Just go back to your school, spend 5 minutes walking around the staff members. You are not actually doing anything. All you need to do is to look stressed, look upset. Just 5 minutes, just walk around the school. And the staff members could see you, walk amongst them, look angry, look upset. Just do that for 5 minutes. I said, in 5 minutes time, the whole school will be in turmoil. That's your influence. But if you're a happy person, I would say this: the teachers are much happier. Therefore, don't just get angry, upset, angry, upset, angry, upset. So you say, then what should we do? Can I encourage you, now that you have come to the SLF, after the SLF, of course, some of you are actually back in school, okay? But kind of after the SLF, can we take the attitude in this way? Be a breath of fresh air. Be a breath of fresh air. So that the people around us could feel it. Hey, you have changed for the better. You are happier. And therefore, I am happier. Be that breath of fresh air. And so, always remember that as educators, never forget the teacher's heartbeat, the beating heart of a loving teacher. How do we define what a teacher's heartbeat is like? I do not know. Therefore, what I'll do is to tell you a story to illustrate. And I'll use this story as the closing story for my presentation, my conversation with you, okay? And this story is about a school that I visited. So many years ago, and when I say many years, I do mean many years, like something like at least 15 to 20 years ago, all right? So at that point in time, another country invited me to help to train their head teachers or school principals. Yeah? So I went to that country, and the ministry, okay, the education ministry, okay, the official said something to me in this way. So thanks very much for being here, and you know, what I'll do is that I'll bring you to see a school so that you have a better idea of what a school is like and perhaps some of the challenges. So then this official, that there's in many other places that I've gone to, sometimes they show me some of their best schools, okay? But this official actually did this. So if you go to our city and see one of those schools that are good, you're not going to see anything very much. So why don't I do this? I bring you to a school in a rural setting, yeah? And then at least you have a sense, okay, of the sort of schools that we have in good numbers. And this is not one of the most difficult circumstances, situations that we have schools in the difficult situation. Yeah, but the way that she has, and it's a she, this official, the way that she described the school was this: it's a school kind of on a slope of a kind of mountain valley, all right, valley and with some mountainous, you know. So it's a school on the slope of a kind of valley beside a river in a rural setting. Now, when she describes it that way, it is the school kind of on a kind of slope, okay, in a valley beside a river in a rural setting. Immediately, I think of what? For example, for you, it might be like Isle of Skye. So imagine it's like Isle of Skye, or perhaps Switzerland, and you know, nice little village school, and then beside a river, that sort of serenity, and then you have cows or cattle, or and then you know, nice rural setting. That was what I thought it was. So on that day itself, so drove me in the car, and then after a little while, the city roads disappear, and then it started to become more like village sort of roads. And it was so bumpy because the potholes all over, and I don't actually travel well. So I get motion sickness and all the time with that, and then, you know, winding roads and motion sickness, and all the time she was talking about leadership. And the more that she talk about ship, the more I feel like throwing up. And finally, we reached the school. And when we reached the school, I finally knew what she meant by a school beside a river. It was really a school beside the river, but it was a river that before you actually reach the river, you could smell the river. And it was repulsive. The water was not transparent. The water was not even translucent. The water was actually opaque. You can't even see through the water. It was dirty. it was muddy, and there was a lot of filth in that river, and it really smells horrible. And the river was really beside the school, as in like part of the, on one side of the building, if you just open the window and you jump out the window, you will land in the river itself. You jump out the window and you'll be inside the river. Okay, so that was that sort of school. So when I reached the school, I came down and I'm feeling rather sick because of motion sickness, and quite relieved that finally we are there. Then I looked around and there was this welcoming party, and the principal or the head teacher was there to welcome. So hello, hello. And he and the staff members didn't speak much English. So there was a country that English wasn't the native language, yeah? Didn't speak much English. So the usual hello, hello. And then I said, oh, wow, you know. So, and I looked around, there were a lot of children and young people, so good sized school. Okay? So I said, oh, kind of, hello, so, you know, and they said, oh, I'm the principal, okay, through a translator, yeah. So I said, oh, how many staff members do you have? Yeah. Then he said, oh, me and 12 teachers. I said, oh, okay, you and 12 teachers, oh, with so many children. Wow, you know, 12 teachers will handle so many children. So I said, then how many perhaps administrative staff that you have? And his response was, me and 12 teachers. So okay, so don't you have some other maybe technical staff, or, you know, and his response was, me and 12 teachers. Okay, I got it. Everything, me and 12 teachers. Okay. So then, being rather Singaporean and of course our modern speak, yeah, so I started asking, like, you know, so what is your vision statement and what's your mission statement? You know, he didn't understand. Even with the translator, he didn't understand what he mean by mission statement or vision statement or whatever statement. He didn't understand. So finally, I said, so why don't you just tell me what your school is trying to do? With the translator, he understood, and he told me, what's my school about? What are we trying to do? And he told me, my school is about getting children out of poverty. Period. So I asked him, what do you mean? And actually, in my mind, I was actually wowed by the, if you call it a mission statement, wow, so simple, and in some ways so elegant. Get children out of poverty. So I think, what do you mean? He said, look around. This is just farmland. Then he asked me, how much do you spend on some of these things that you buy in the city? Then when I told him, his response was, you spend dollars to buy these things in the city. We don't get even cents down here in our village. And therefore, our school is precisely to help children and these families out of poverty, to provide education so that there is a chance to break this poverty. And it's not just poverty, it's generational poverty. So I say, wow. So I say, so what do you do? He says, very simple. Do two things. Teach English and teach IT. Let the children learn some English, learn some computers, and we are talking about 15 to 20 years ago. Learn English, learn computers, learn something, then they could go to the city and find jobs. If they all stay in the village with us, then together we will be staying in this sort of situation, generation after generation, in poverty. Therefore, teach them some English, teach them some computer skills, go to the city, find jobs. I said, wow, that's great. It sounds great. So I asked him, how many teachers who can actually teach English? His response, nobody. I said, oh, nobody can teach English. He says, nobody. Then I said, then who actually teach English to the children? His response, me and 12 teachers. Then I asked him, who knows how to use computers? How to teach computers to the children? His response, nobody. Then I asked, then who actually teach the children computers? Me and 12 teachers. And he explained to me, we don't know anything very much, but between me and 12 teachers, we make things happen for these children. We'll learn. And then he took me to a small little room. And in there were some computers. So I was impressed. I said, where do you get the money to buy these few computers? And by the way, all these computers, he says, to go to the internet. In that particular school, which sometimes they don't even have electricity, there is only one telephone line. Okay. Therefore, at that point, I actually asked him, how many LAN points do you have? He didn't understand. What do you mean by LAN points? So finally, I understood there was only one telephone line in the school. And so long as they are trying to connect to the internet to show the children internet and how to connect to the internet and try to do some computer lessons, what that means is that the whole school, the principal, cannot even make a phone call. There's only one telephone line. So there were some computers in there. And then I asked him, where do you get the money from? Then he said, the villagers, the farmers, together, we pool our money together and get some of these computers. So I said, but everybody is living in poverty down here. Why would the farmers come forward to pool their money together to get these computers? And his response to me was this: when everybody in our community understands that this school is the only hope for their children, from rock we squeeze water. And that's what he said to me. I was astounded. Actually, the school was located beside a really pungent river. And yet, ironically, the teachers, me and 12 teachers, they were a breath of fresh air. Why they were a breath of fresh air? Because to me, they bring hope to the children and the families. They are people who plant trees, hoping that the children one day could sit under those trees. And perhaps, if not for me telling this story, no one will ever know who planted those trees in the first place. And therefore, these are educators. Despite harsh situations and conditions, they persevered. Ladies and gentlemen, that's who you are. That's who I am. That's what we do. We bring hope to the next generation, and we help to build our country. So thank you very much for who you are, what you do. Thank you very much. If no one else has ever said thank you to you, then let me be the one to thank you for who you are, what you do. Thank you very much. Ollie, back to you. Thank you.
Pak Tee, I don't know if you can see the virtual hand claps at the bottom of the screen, but you're getting so many hand claps from the from the virtual audience that we've got here, and there were a number of comments in the chat with people agreeing with what you're saying, people liking what you're saying around that. I'm going to folks, we've still got maybe about sort of 30 minutes now for us to have a conversation and to ask some questions, and what I would do, folks that are on the call and listening in, and we've got people, Pak Tee, from all over Scotland, from the Northern Isles to the rural south to some of our big cities. So a real mix of practitioners I can see from different ages and stages, but I would just encourage you folks to have a think about what you've heard there. Maybe put some questions in the chat and we can pick up on those, and we'll sort of try and theme them. And while people are thinking about that, Pak Tee, I'll just reflect on a couple of things that you said. I can see we've even got an international guest from Canada that's on the call as well. They're saying hello. But just to pick up on a couple of things that you said, and this is in the kind of chronological order as I was listening and making notes. And I just really enjoyed it all. You had me captivated the whole way through. You really did. I love that bit about just being honest, that most children do not care about policy. Like, how true is that? But what they care about is that experience that we're going to have in the classroom. And I just loved how later on in your talk you link that to student well-being. And I hadn't really thought of that before. That whole bit around, because children spend so long of their lives in our care, that if we get that right, that's got to have an impact on that and their well-being. If they're happy, if they're joyful, if they're comfortable in their learning, that's got to have a measurable impact. So thanks for that. I love the bit about fractions don't make people feel warm and fuzzy, and I was thinking to myself, fractions still fill me with fear, but it's the personality and the warmth that goes along with that. I was spinning my finger above my head a few more times around the different perspectives around that, and I thought that your analogy there and the metaphor was really good. We've got to see things from different perspectives, and it's no wonder, in your words, that the top doesn't always see the same thing as the bottom. How are we bringing together that common language at all levels of the system to unite us around our common purpose, which you said is working for the good of children, and you illustrated that beautifully, with that story, at the end. I like the bit about what's important to us. Well, it's about our students, number one. It's about our craft, driven by the notion of children's future, and of course being professionals, professionalism that brings as well. And then I also like the bit about the how do we inspect inspired students without inspired teachers, bringing that back to professional learning, and that acknowledgement of that young people are growing up in a world very different to 5 years ago, to 10 years ago, certainly different from when we grew up. And then that challenge, which has got a lot of interest on Twitter around that. If artificial intelligence is artificial intelligence, then what's real intelligence? And how do we use artificial intelligence to develop real intelligence? How do we to develop human capacity? And there may be some questions around that later, later on. And then just that very realistic bit at the end is that we might not be able to change the world. We might not be able to change the whole education system, but actually we've got the capacity to touch children's lives, to influence the people directly around us around that. And if we were all doing that, and we were all, embracing that in terms of happiness and joy and well-being, then actually that external world, would be so much better. And that bit around be that breath of fresh air, and what is the teacher's heartbeat? And there were a number of comments in the chat, but I think everybody was captivated by your story. I mean, it took so many different directions and turns, and it was beautifully told. But at the end of the day, a great story about passionate teachers working in tricky circumstances unique to them. And we've all got tricky circumstances that are unique to us. But what was the important thing? The important thing was the children. The important thing was building the staff team around that and engaging with the local community to break that cycle of poverty. So just loads in that, Pak Tee, loads in that. So thank you so much for everything that you've done there.
Well, thank you for saying that, Oli. Thank you.
So I'm going to go through. We've got some questions here, and we'll pick some questions up from the chat around that. But I'll maybe sort of kick off if that's okay for you. And you touched a little bit on this, in your presentation. But I think we've talked a lot during the SLF conversations around pedagogy and the importance of pedagogy and these things. And I know from your, from your book, your 2017 book, you talk about, teaching less, but learning more. And I think in this particular talk, you referred to it as like teaching less, but teaching better, around that. And I just wondered if you just wanted to expand on that, a little bit, because I think people will be really interested, in that.
Okay, so the idea is this. Okay, so let me use an analogy. So teaching and learning is perhaps like a mother, cooking food for the child. Yeah. So when you have all these ingredients, you cook it, and then after that you feed the child. Yeah. So this is like a teacher. You put all the kind of information and then put it into bite size as a lesson. Yeah. And then you teach. Now the only thing is that is just half the equation. On the other side, as important, if not more important, is called the child, the learner. If the mother feeds, the child is supposed to eat. Okay. And it's not just eating, it's actually ingestion, then followed by digestion, then assimilation before the child grows. So in the same way as the teacher teaches, the main thing is that the child, the learner, must be able to ingest, digest, assimilate, and then before the child could grow. And in this case, of course, in knowledge and in wisdom. Yeah? But the difficulty actually is this. We are so conscientious and responsible that we will just feed and feed and feed. And the child says, I don't want to eat, I don't want to eat, I don't want to eat, I don't want to eat. And when that happens, we try to force it down the throat, force it down the throat, force it down the throat. Okay? And that is not helpful. The main thing is this, is to encourage teachers. Why don't you just taste the food? Actually, you may not enjoy the food yourself. Some food, not palatable. Some food, not ingestible. Some food, not digestible. Some food, probably no nutrition. Some food, downright poisonous. Therefore, if you use this analogy, the main thing is for teachers to think from this perspective. How do I pace it such that actually, instead of just simply teaching more and more with the assumption that more teaching implies more learning, how do I pace it out reasonably, make lessons really interesting so that actually the child wants to eat and it is ingestible, digestible, easy to assimilate and help them to grow. So we are thinking from that perspective, shifting the way that teachers think about teaching and learning and shifting the focus. Don't keep thinking, this is how I've been teaching for the past 20 years. Think, how do I help different children to be able to grasp what I'm saying and in a way that they enjoy? Then that is what we're trying to do. Then the way to do it, the teachers will figure it out. We have very good teachers. Once they get the philosophy, they know how to figure out the house by themselves. How do you do it? Okay, so I pause here. Does that help, Audrey?
That helps. That helps hugely. I mean, there was a huge amount in there, and we've had comments in the chat around your ability to link to analogies and storytelling makes it really powerful and really easy to understand. But I also really liked with what you're saying there is that this is about an overarching philosophy, but then there's a trust in teachers to take the overarching philosophy and make sure that's relevant for their children in their classrooms, in their local environment. And that in itself, I think, is incredibly powerful. Pak Tee, we've had one or two questions in the chat around teacher well-being, and we know that teacher well-being is, well, as important as student well-being, obviously, as well. And I just wondered if you had any reflections around, because let's face it, we also know that in many parts of the world at the moment, including Scotland, teachers are struggling. Workload is hard. Life outside of work is hard, and you indicated towards that at the start of your presentation. But I wonder whether you've got any reflections on teacher well-being, and is there, and perhaps you could maybe share with the audience some of the strategies that you've either seen internationally or globally to help with teacher well-being around that? You've already made a useful comment about professional learning and bringing people together for dialogue, but anything else that you've seen or might want to reflect on there that we might find interesting in Scotland?
Okay, so I think I'll speak as a Singaporean. I think it's unfair for me to use any other countries or to comment on other people's systems. Okay, so as a Singaporean, for me personally, okay, this is what my country is trying to do. So the first thing is, let's understand what is teacher well-being. So one, there's a set of kind of hygiene factors. Then the other is the set of kind of motivators. By hygiene factors, we mean, okay, firstly, teachers in my country, they are pretty, I'll say they have good jobs. Okay, we have different pathways. For example, we have 3 tracks, so that teachers who like to remain as teachers rather than to advance in their career by being more and more in an administrative leadership position, they could advance on the teaching track. So teacher, senior teacher, lead teacher, master teacher, and these are teachers who go up that career ladder by being more and more an expert in teaching and learning, curriculum pedagogy, and they mentor other younger teachers and stuff like that. And then there's, of course, another pathway of leadership, by which we mean that you become a head of department, a teacher becomes a head of department, then maybe subsequently a vice principal, and then become a principal, stuff like that. So one is that the set of hygiene factors is good, that the system supports in the way that different people have good jobs, pay is sufficient. All right, it's not like you're going to get rich as a teacher, but definitely comfortable enough. But we have different tracks for different sort of people. So that is one set of factors. Okay? But more importantly, 2 other things. When we say teacher well-being, when we say being is well, sometimes we all think about how to reduce the workload. So yes, that part is important, and my country is thinking very hard about kind of managing rather than directly just reducing, managing workload. Okay, that's the difference. Because actually, we can be busy and we don't really mind that much if that busyness is meaningful. What we can't stand is called meaningless busyness. That sort of busyness that just eats at me because I don't even know what it is for. I don't see any benefit. And we are just going round and round in circles. That sort of busyness is what people cannot stand. Therefore, when we say meaningful, it means a few things. We're doing more and more, one, in terms of that professional learning. 2, is that we understand the teacher psychology, at least in my country, in this way. When teachers actually feel that students enjoy their lessons, learn real things and enjoy their lessons, they feel happy and satisfied. Therefore, it's not necessarily just, let me take away teaching from you, but how do I help you to succeed in teaching? Therefore, that meaningfulness, actually, that meaningful busyness actually adds to well-being. When you feel that, you work as a teacher, I come in to become a teacher, and I have a suitable amount of load. Of course, it should not be overwhelming, a reasonable amount of work, but this work, actually, you support me to teach well. And my interaction with the students becomes such that I can see how I'm benefiting them. And I can also feel that they are building me up as a teacher, because just from the happy faces in my classroom, I'm happy, I'm satisfied, I'm fulfilled. That's why I become a teacher. And so meaningful busyness. And one other last thing is called positive narrative. In Singapore, we try very hard to make sure that education is a positive narrative, that the profession stays as a respectable one. That is to say, of course, we have parent complaints and so on, but by far and by large, okay, we make sure that the society understands. If you have a problem, please work with the teacher. Trust that the school, the teachers do love your child. Work with your teacher. Don't just complain about the teachers. Let's have that mutual trust. Our teachers and the teaching profession is a very respectable one. And that helps in teacher well-being. Okay, so I pause here. Does that help?
That helps hugely, Pak Tee, around that. And just to summarize, like, I can see, as you describe it, I can absolutely see how having good pathways for teachers, not just leadership tracks, but that ability to progress, in the classroom and be mentors, for teachers, something that you enjoy doing your craft, that would be hugely motivating. And the second point that you made around is a really interesting way of thinking about it. So we talk a lot about reducing workload around that, but we don't always acknowledge, well, actually, sometimes it's not about reducing, it's about a meaningful workload, and that can be empowering in itself. So you've given us, I think, lots to think about in that as well. And again, I know from previous conversations that you and I have had, or when I've spoke to other colleagues in Singapore, that there is that positive narrative, around education. People believe education is important. Let's get involved in education. Let's make sure that we're all united to talking about the positives, of the system. And I think we do that last one quite well in Scotland, but sometimes we get drawn into the negative. And as you know, education in Scotland is a very, very political, very, very political thing, and that sometimes, can come with its own challenges. So thank you for that. Pak Tee, there was a question in the chat, and you touched a little bit on this, and I think that people would be interested in your perspective. And I also know that you've written a paper quite recently, and that's about artificial intelligence around that. And I know that you've got views on that. So you talked a little bit about if artificial intelligence is artificial intelligence, what is real intelligence, around that. But I suppose, could you share again, in your view, what are the positives, in terms of AI in education, and what are the sorts of things in your view that we should be sort of looking out for? And I suppose we know the kind of classic arguments for this, but we would just be interested in the Pak Tee view of this, because you've got such a great way of looking at things slightly differently.
Well, thank you for saying that. Okay, so firstly, I am no expert, all right, in artificial intelligence. Actually, I'm not an expert in almost anything. But this thing called artificial intelligence actually is not new. It's just that it's kind of new in education, but it has never really been that new. Okay, it's just that it is now kind of like really in the limelight. Probably started because of ChatGPT and the different versions and so on and so forth. So some of these pros and cons have been well argued and documented. So for example, with artificial intelligence, you can, for example, take student data, and then they can do all sorts of analysis, and it can inform policy, inform practice. So artificial intelligence being, if this computer, it can do all these analysis very fast, and with the right programming, you get a lot of extra information. Okay, and you can customize for students. For example, one way that we have been using now is real practice in Singapore is, for example, a child with artificial intelligence. So instead of directly a human teacher, that makes it much faster. So based on the kind of previous performance level, okay, of the child, the next set of questions will kind of measure itself, okay, so that it kind of moves the child just a little further. Okay, so all these things could be automated. So there are the pros. And then there are, of course, the usual cons, like, for example, ethical use and how to make sure that, there's no cheating and stuff like that. Take an essay, maybe the student didn't write it, click something, and then ChatGPT just generates an essay and they hand it in. Okay, is that right? And obviously, people say that's wrong, that's not your work. So there are all these issues on the ground. So the pros and cons actually well argued and well documented. So my perspective is really this. It's a play on words, as I said just now. Okay, asking if artificial intelligence is kind of artificial, then what exactly is real intelligence? That is to say, if you are a teacher, let's forget this whole thing about artificial intelligence first. If you're a teacher, you watch a child do something, and then you say to yourself, that's very clever. That's very clever. Now, why do you say that? Why do you say that? And then you ask one other very important question. If today you say that that's very clever, is this function taken over by artificial intelligence now or in the near future? If it is, then if we are still going along that same line, then we are just preparing the child to almost compete with artificial intelligence. And that is not going to be very wise, because we are human beings. We get tired. Computers, they don't get tired. Just merely on that, we lose out. Therefore, a different set of questions would be, what exactly is this real intelligence that we are talking about in this kind of situation now? And that is for a teacher to really come together. And that's where the professional learning, and it's not I alone who can answer this question, it's together as a profession. We work together and say, what exactly it is? And then we center our education to help children to develop this sort of intelligence, to make sure that these sort of intelligence have a chance to flourish. And these real skills that not easily replicated by a machine. I'm not saying that everything in education will have to move that way, but we are shifting towards that. So once upon a time when we were educated, we do long divisions, right? Multiplication and long divisions. Today, everybody just use a calculator. Yeah. Once upon a time, if you're driving around, let's say in London and so on, they say, oh, that's a really good cab driver. Why? Because I know London inside out. Yeah, every road. Today you have a GPS, you're all right. So if you know all the London roads kind of inside out, today you have no more advantage because you have GPS. Then what exactly would you say? Think. If you were to get into a cab, you say, that is a really good cab driver. That is a really good cab driver. What would that be? And so more and more, we are encouraging our educators to think along those lines. Essentially, the main message is really this. It's not really about artificial intelligence per se. It is called a paradigm shift in education. And when there is a paradigm shift in education, as educators, together, when we come and collaborate with one another, sometimes we are just talking about practices, but I'm advocating and encouraging that when we collaborate with one another, is to put our brains together and ask fundamental questions so that this, so to speak, paradigm shift will really be beneficial, reasonable, and definitely helping our children for the future. So I don't have an answer to that. It is more important to have a process rather to say, I have an answer now. That process of thinking through and collaborating is more important than directly now someone has an answer. Okay, so I pause here. Does that help?
No, that I mean, again, that really helps. And I was joking in some ways around give us a Pak Tee view on that, because you'll make us think differently about it. And for someone that spend a lot of time working in education technology, I've not thought about some of the things you've described there in that way. So that was really, really helpful for me. And I know that will be really, really helpful for the people on the call as well. And you're absolutely right. If we, rather than thinking about the technology, which at the time which now is artificial intelligence or generative AI, obviously that thing of it, if we're thinking about this as about a paradigm shift in society, which of course leads to a paradigm shift in education, and how do we plan for that? How do we get the right people in the room that work for children around that to sort of plan for that? That of course makes a lot more sense than sometimes what happens when we get new technologies that become available, whereas we ban them, we block them, we ignore them in schools, and of course then young people find ways to navigate them or to engage with these technologies at home. We can't stop these technology shifts. So how do we, at least in education, try to keep up, and at best just try to keep slightly ahead in terms of that advice around the use of the tools, the ethics behind these tools, and as you hinted at, what might this mean for skills and jobs, of the future? Really, really interesting. So thank you, thank you. We've got two more questions, if that's okay. And I'm also conscious, folks, that I think, well, that Pak Tee is in Singapore at the moment, so I think it's probably worth mentioning that it's now 15 minutes past midnight for Pak Tee, if I've got my time zones correct, around that. So we promised that we won't keep you up all night. We're grateful for you joining us. Yeah,
my privilege to be here. Yeah.
Okay. It's great. Well, I've got a question about curriculum and curriculum development, and then I've also got a question around strategy. So I'll just ask the question around curriculum first, if that's okay. So you'll know, being on the International Council of Education Advisors, that we've had an awful lot of reports, around Scottish education. In fact, Santiago, who was speaking at a conference today, and he says that actually Scotland may be one of the most overdiagnosed countries in the world in terms of external reports. But one of the things that we are wrestling with at the moment is, of course, curriculum development and curriculum review around that. And I was just really interested, from your insights of Singapore, what the approach to curriculum review or curriculum development is in Singapore, and how you've adapted or thinking about adapting to the changing needs of society, a bit like the artificial intelligence that we've had, in future job markets around that. How are you doing your best to be dynamic around this and not just static?
Okay, so of course we can spend a whole day talking about some of these things, yeah. And there will be many other people who will have actually much more to say than the little bit that I could say. So perhaps let me just focus on one or two things as a response. Firstly, the idea of curriculum and curriculum change. One of the kind of like a catchphrase of some sorts, okay, or perhaps it's a cliche now, overused. This idea of future ready. Now, but the way that I'll understand it in our system here in Singapore is this: when we say future ready, it doesn't mean that right now being equipped with a set of knowledge and skills that will be definitely relevant to the future. We acknowledge that sometimes it's really difficult to tell what the future holds. Some years ago, we didn't know that COVID-19 was coming. And with COVID-19, the whole industry could disappear. And so that sort of change, what we need is to help our people future ready in the sense of disposition, by which I mean always learning, willing to be flexible, adaptable, and when things change and it doesn't seem to favor you, have the gumption to stand up again. So many business may fail, and suddenly you realize that whatever knowledge that I have had and skills that I have no longer relevant, whole industry is gone. Then what I need is to have that kind of psychological gumption, that preparedness to stand up again and to be willing and humble to perhaps start again. And sometimes right at the bottom, to go into a new industry, to explore new opportunities, and to pick up new skills, and to be able to do this even when I'm no longer like a young person. And so to us, the curriculum is what they ought to learn. To us, it's not just a matter of a set of knowledge and skills. Yes, based on our best prediction, we change certain things. But more importantly, we know that it is helping to shape the character, the disposition of this person. So lifelong learner with that sort of resilience. So that's where we are actually going. Then, of course, otherwise, in terms of actual curriculum, yes, climate change and so on, we have shifted some parts of this and that science or geography and things like that to take into account some of these things and give children or young people a chance to work on projects related to, say, conservation, sustainability, things like that. That takes place. However, more importantly, is to help people to prepare themselves. When big change comes, are we able to stand up? That is the main thing. So I hope that that helps.
Yeah, no, it really helps. And again, coming through everything that you've said there is just, and you mentioned it in a previous answer. It's just having that overall philosophy around that, the overall kind of sense of direction, and leaving the detail to the professionals, around that. And that for me is the powerful thing. We often, as you know, talk about empowerment, in Scotland, but sometimes that's got different connotations, like of the meaning. So what you're saying there is hugely helpful, I think, and very, very wise, if you don't mind me saying. And one more question for you, if that's okay, and then we will let you go to bed, I promise. But
okay.
and it's really around, it's around planning ahead around this. We are, in Scotland, as you know, going into a period of education reform. Like, we don't know how quickly. Like, we'll go into that. We know that education reform, takes time, but it kind of strikes me that we've not always been good in Scottish education about planning ahead on a regular cycle. So I'm just interested around your views around what's the importance of planning ahead. And I'm talking about the importance of planning ahead at like 10, 20, 30 years, like in advance. What's the what when we're thinking about planning ahead in Scotland for education reform? I mean, obviously we can't predict what the situation will be in 30 years, but we should have a longitudinal plan, right? Or what's your view on that? Because I know this is something that Singapore again is quite good at, in terms of that.
Okay, so firstly, thank you for saying that. Okay, please don't give us too much credit. we are still learning, and we just kind of learn from mistakes and stumble around and try to find our way also. So perhaps let me comment in this way. It is actually quite crucial to plan ahead. The only thing is that when we plan ahead, our mentality towards what planning ahead actually means is the crucial factor down here. If we plan ahead, that gives us a direction. But we are always prepared that circumstances can change. We're always monitoring, always looking out, so that when circumstances change, this plan is flexible enough to adapt accordingly. If we do not plan ahead at all, or simply say, okay, because things keep changing, and so now the planning cycles are getting shorter and shorter. Yes, there's some wisdom in that. Okay, so there's no problem. Okay, from let's say 5-year plan, last time it used to be a 10-year plan, then 5-year plan, then 3-year plan. Okay, we can do some of these things. Let's say it's just a 3-year plan. Okay, it just means that for this 3 years, there'll be much more details than there, assuming that situation in these 3 years will be quite stable. We should be able to do all these things. That's fine. But a kind of 10-year means that we are really looking ahead. We can't see very clearly, but we say that at least as of now, that should be the right direction. That's the direction because it is backed up by our fundamental philosophies, the values that we hold dear. It's not because I know exactly the destination and I could map it out in detail exactly what that's supposed to look like, but that these are our values. This is what it is all about. So while I can't see very, very clearly and tell you that's exactly the destination, I think this is the right direction. Mm-hmm. And therefore that signpost point that way. And so there could be that sort of long-term planning, with a kind of medium-term planning, and with some short-term planning. But all the time, the main thing is this: we are always prepared to be adaptable. When things change, we adapt accordingly. And not forgetting that some of these values we still hold dear, they anchor us so that we do not lose ourselves in the waves of change. And so that would be the most important thing for us in navigating these turbulent waves. Okay, so I hope that that's useful.
Yeah, it does, and you're just getting me thinking there, because it's you know, it reminds me of the metaphor sometimes that it's important to have your North Star, you know, so you know the direction that you're traveling in, but actually the way to get there sometimes is about using a compass, not a map. Because if you use a map, you follow that direct path, and it's not very adaptable, you know, because you're following the roads and pathways around that you're quite restricted. But if you've got your compass, then if you wander off track, it will still always bring you back. So you can get a little bit off it, and that's really made me sort of think about that as well. Pak Tee, we're gonna call it for a closer. Can I just say, now you can't see the kind of the back end of this, but my phone has been buzzing away here, and some of those have been personal WhatsApp messages or Twitter messages or Facebook messages, just from people that I know saying that they're really enjoying listening to the conversation around that. And there have been some lovely comments in the chat, which, you know, we'll encourage you to sort of read as well. But can I just say that for me personally, it's been an absolute privilege to have this conversation with you. We wanted this year to be a series of conversations. You gave us a great provocation at the start. I feel that we've drawn out of that, but it's felt like we're not thousands of miles away from each other. It feels like we've got a real connection with that, and I've really thoroughly enjoyed speaking to you. So if we could just sort of say a heartfelt, you know, warm thank you from Scotland. We look forward to collaborating with you soon, and hopefully seeing you back in Scotland, you know, back in Scotland soon. And the folks on the call that are here, we've put an evaluation link up around that as well. But if you're still on the call, if you would just join me to say a big thank you to Pak Tee, we would really appreciate that. Thank you so much, Pak Tee. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. So let me just before I leave, dear educators in Scotland, all right, just remember, we are people who plant trees, yeah? So that some other people sit under those trees, and then no one knows who planted those trees in the first place. That's who you are. That's who I am. That's where the connection is. So stand tall, be a breath of fresh air. Thank you very much for who you are and what you do. Be encouraged. So thank you very much. All the best.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you then. Okay. All right then. Bye-bye then.